Hi, this is Pandora, and today I'd like to show you how to make a quilted pot holder out of upcycled clothing, and we'll be using free motion quilting, applique, and a satin stitch. So let's get started. For materials today, you'll need 3 colors of cotton. I'm using some old shirts. And you'll need something to be the quilt batting. In this case, I'm using an old fleece sweatshirt. For my pattern, I used a letter size sheet of paper, folded a triangle over, and cut the end piece off. This gave me a nice 8.5 by 8.5 inch square. You may want to try out a couple different sizes to see what works for you. I find that 7 by 7 up to 10 inch by 10 inch works pretty well. You can even do something that's somewhat rectangular. Now take your fleece and cut around all the seam lines until you get a nice flat piece of fabric. Because this is just going to be the batting on the inside of the pot holder, I'm not going to use an iron. I'll just kind of smooth it flat with my hands. Make sure you cut off any elastic or drawstring area, as this will make your pieces easier to cut out. Pin your pattern to a corner of the fleece fabric and cut out your batting or inner pot holder layer. This is a great time to use old, worn out, soiled clothing, as this layer will be the batting inside your pot holder and won't show. You'll need to do the same with your front and back fabrics. You can use the same fabric for front and back or choose complementary colors. Now sandwich your batting between the front and back fabric. Now prepare your fabric that you want to use for the applique. I used a sleeve because it was a small piece of fabric that I couldn't use for much else. This is a good time to use up tiny scraps that you have sitting around. For my applique pattern, I used the leftover strip of paper that I cut off the square and cut a very simple heart pattern out. Pin your pattern to the fabric and cut out your applique. Use quilting pins to pin your applique through all 3 layers of your pot holder. Secure the rest of your pot holder together so that the fabric does not shift while sewing. Sew the applique to your pot holder with a satin stitch through all 3 layers. Put your free motion quilting foot on and sew around the outside edge of your applique. This echoes your applique pattern and gives you a base to start your free motion quilting off of. When you get to the end of your pattern, begin to move the fabric in smooth, looping patterns, being careful not to cross back over any of your lines. You'll need to keep moving as your feed dogs are lowered when you're doing the free motion quilting. Keep moving until all of your fabric is covered and secured with quilting. As you get the hang of it, get a little bit fancier with your patterns. Try spiraling in and spiraling out again without crossing your thread. Be sure to remove any pins as you get close to them so that you do not run over them with your foot. When working on projects at home, keep in mind the 3 principles of reduce, reuse, and recycle. Reducing the number of things you buy and consume is the most helpful for the environment. Reusing items is the next important concept. Reusing items you already have is better than buying new. Clothing should be worn for as long as it is useful. It is better to donate usable clothing than to repurpose it. When clothing is ragged, then you can upcycle it to create something new. Clothing can also be given to causes that recycle it into new products. Ultimately, we should buy only items that are 100% compostable. Once you've covered the fabric with quilting, then just loop in a couple of times to finish off and then cut your threads. If your fabric has shifted a bit, just cut off the extra edges. While working on your sewing projects, use it as a Zen meditation time to think about doing your best to create a better world. How can you reduce what you consume? How can you reuse things that you already have before buying something new? How can you help your neighbors do the same? Now you'll need to create the binding for your pot holder. Here I'm using some old shirt sleeves. You'll need 2-inch strips of fabric, enough to circle around your pot holder. For best results, iron your fabric before cutting out your 2-inch strips. If your fabric is not long enough to make a strip that will go around your pot holder, you can sew 2 pieces together to make a longer strip. Once you have your 2-inch strips cut, lay it along the edge of your pot holder with good sides together. Sew down the full length, 1/4 inch from the edge. When you get near the bottom, stop 1/4 inch from the end and then face your needle towards the corner and sew off the end. Lift up your foot and fold up your fabric so that it is even with the top edge, and then continue on with the next side, making a 1/4 inch seam. Do this with all of the corners and continue sewing around until you get to the bottom corner of the last side. When you get to the bottom corner of the last side, just sew until you reach the seam that you started with. Now fold the binding fabric so that it is double, and then fold it again over to the front side. You can pin this in place for a neater look, or just keep folding it over as you sew down the edge. Sew a straight stitch at the edge of the binding until you get almost all the way around back to where you started. Once you've sewn all the way around, you can now use any extra strip of fabric to make a loop, or in this case, I'm just making a tab to use as a hanger. This pot holder doesn't have any heavy insulating fabrics, so it's probably not going to be good for using to pull hot pans out of the oven. It might be good to be used as a pad to set things on to protect your countertops. And there's your pot holder. Happy sewing!